Go ahead and put in the chat if you can hear us good.
Yeah, we can hear you.
We're good? Okay. Thank you. Well, welcome everybody to our February Assessment Directors Meeting. As we approach, as I was driving to work today, I thought, well, the football season's over. Testing season is going to start. But then I thought, well, no, because testing season's all year long, like club sports, maybe, where it just never ends. But in a way, we're getting close to testing season, and our agenda today will reflect that. As we get ready to operationalize the new ADAM system that Pearson has provided. For those of you who provide online instruction to your students, some of you will be taking advantage of our online test administration for summative tests this spring for the first time. So there's a lot of exciting things going forward, but we'll go ahead and get started. If we can go ahead and we'll just review this. I will call out on our success criteria: actively participate and collaborate. Today's meeting, I don't think we're using our normal tools because we don't have any, none of our staff had interactive elements or a specific feedback that we're trying to gather. So that might be a little bit reduced today. But again, the chat is always available. And then also you can raise your hand at any time and join us, those of you who are not here with us in person. Let's go to my quote. This is from a book that I was reading as well this last month called Drive. And this one felt personally relevant to me. This greatness and nearsightedness are incompatible. Meaningful achievement depends on lifting one's sights, pushing toward the horizon. I get accused in my personal life sometimes of getting too focused on the task at hand, my wife will say, and or even on time and trying to accomplish things in a certain amount of time. So when I read this in this book, it resonated with me personally, because sometimes that will interfere with the larger goal, which is to continually improve and try to get to greatness in every aspect of our lives. That's the meaning behind that thought that I shared today. All right, next slide. So our last board meeting in January, actually in February, the 406 Early Learning Program benchmark assessments, that came to the full board. They directed that to go to a future study session. And I believe right now, while the agenda is not in concrete yet, I think that'll be in the March study session for our Board of Education. That should be show up on the agenda as an action item. And so that at the end of that 2-hour time that we can discuss this rule, particularly we'll go through the process that's typically used for standard setting. Will be part of that because the point of discussion around that rule amendment that brought this direction to make it move it to a study session was around the reading on grade level cut scores that have been established and in place since at least 2017 in Utah. We were just recommending that those be put in rule, and that's raised. One of the reasons we recommend put it in rule is to make it really visible and transparent, and that's brought a need for us to have a study session. So that'll go forward then. Our Utah Compose contract and the dual language immersion contract where we were adding funds, both of those went through our Board of Education and the consent calendar recently. So we have Utah Compose for at least another school year. And then our LTI, that was just adding funds for the expanded testing as those DLI programs mature and many of your LEAs and kids move forward in that. So coming up in March, we're hopeful that the reading, we have the new contract for the reading provider, Cadence, and we're hopeful that that contract language will be solidified into the full board in March. And we'll continue to move forward. That's a formality, but it's an important one to allow us to advance the work with LEAs around that application. In committee, we expect to have 404, which is our testing rule. And the reason we bring that forward is it has a date in there that the date that the test administration testing ethics policy has been renewed or reviewed. So it's incorporated into that rule, and we're going to need to update the testing ethics policy related to the 2-proctor requirement, which I'll talk briefly a little bit more about here in a minute. And then the parental exclusion for specifically just for elementary state assessments is the removal of the KEEP test. As you know, we're in our last year of administering the KEEP test as a state required assessment. So those are those changes that we anticipate related to that rule. All right, let's go to the next item, the CAI contract. We've been working for several months. There was additional funds provided by our Board of Education And we've worked with the vendor to develop or to create amendment around additional item development to expand that and increase our item pools and resources that we'll have available there. We're hopeful that one also will be available possibly in March, but maybe more likely in April. Okay. So January APAC, just to follow up, the last time we met, we spent some time together as assessment directors talking about the 2 proctor rule recommendation that came out of the assessment audit and then records retention schedules. We took the recommendations on the 2 proctor to assessment accountability policy advisory, as well as the records retention proposals. The 2 proctor language that we advanced out of assessment directors meeting in January was supported by our APAC. And so we'll advance that to the board for their consideration, as mentioned earlier. And then the records retention around our testing, paper-based testing materials, and then also the professional learning around documentation around the ethics training. Assessment Accountability Policy Advisory Committee, I think we came out with a recommendation of 2 years on that records retention, and they actually thought it should be 1 year retention. So I've advanced those recommendations to the State Records Department already, and it's in their process. They have a committee or a group that meets monthly, and I'm waiting for feedback on whether I should come and attend the next meeting that has that on their schedule, or whether they'll just we work electronically, and then I'll provide everybody an update once we get to that point. So that's our update from APAC. We still have vacancies, which I think is the next slide, Amy. We have vacancies. I appreciate several of you have talked to individuals and made recommendations. I've received an application from a board member. I've had another local board member talk to me on the phone, and I expect that person's application to come in. So again, we're still hopeful to get an elementary principal nominee, and then a member with expertise in working with special populations. So that could be certainly individuals at most of your district levels have individuals with specialty, special skills and background in that area. And I would again encourage you to shoulder tap any that you think would be good representatives on that APAC committee. Our next scheduled meeting for that group will be in May. And we leave those open until filled. Because I have one application for a local board already, that'll go to our board in their March executive session. And hopefully we'll fill that slot in March, and the other 2, it'd be great to do that as well. So any help that any of you can give in reaching out and encouraging people to apply for that, those 2 open positions would be greatly appreciated. We do have a couple of visitors with us today to talk about programs that they oversee that also affect us in the assessment world. Greg had communicated with me about potentially being in person. I'm going to see if he's online though. Oh, just a second.
Hey, Vernon, she shut the door.
I'm going to give up my chair for you. Your timing is perfect. Oh. I was just checking to see if you were online, and then I heard the door. So
Let me in.
Amy's running the slides that you'll see up on the screen, and
The seat's really warm. How come? That's my breath. Do I need to hit the green?
No.
Okay. Good morning. How's everybody? Sorry, my apologies. Okay. Your superintendent should have received information about 2 weeks ago. I will be sending out all of this information to principals and to you so you can help. We're in our 3rd year of Elevate, which is fun. Okay. I didn't realize I was out of shape. The Elevate program is designed to serve non-Title I schools that are in TSI, ATSI. So that's one of the criteria. They have to be a non-Title I school, and they have to be in TSI or ATSI. Let's go ahead and move it forward. Here's what the benefits are, which generally, when principals see this, they go, oh, I want to play. So $375,000. which is in statute to support these schools, which is state money. So there's a lot of flexibility. But there are some conditions, and those conditions are that the school, an Elevate school, has to apply. So it has to be voluntary. They have to go through a process where they're approved by the USBE as an Elevate school. As such, they are committing to a 4-year program. The program really is centered on a needs assessment and a root cause analysis, which drives the development of a planning table. I know we use school improvement plans, but a planning table is slightly different because it's a 3-year plan. So in other words, an Elevate school is committed to achieving results 3 years out. So we try to move from a year over year to what it will take to move, if you will, that TSI or ATSI group or whole school improvement in 3 years. They will do a needs assessment root cause analysis by a consultant or the USBE. That consultant is approved and is paid for by the USBE. The other commitment is that an Elevate school will have a coach or a continuous improvement expert, which will be paid for in part by those funds that are released to them. Other than that, the monies come to the LEA. The LEA can use those for that school for myriad purposes. We have schools that use it to buy FTE, programming, professional learning, off-contract time, et cetera. So there's a number of things that the schools can do. We help them. And then the school also will be part of progress monitoring. So let me pause there see if there's any questions from those that are here or online.
Hey, Greg, let me ask you a question, because I don't know this and I'm curious. You're here with us today. This program's been around for, did you say this is the 3rd year?
Yes.
Is it typical that you fill all of the available slots or use all the available funding on years 1 and 2, or and get into a waiting list type of circumstance? Or is it important for us to solicit schools to be able to use those funds?
Great question. So the first part, year one, so we're compelled by statute to select and identify no less than 6 schools annually for Elevate. So that's part of the criteria. So the first year that we ran Elevate, we had approximately 13 applicants, of which 6 were selected. Year 2, we had 25 applicants, of which 7 schools were selected. So to your other point is that we just need to get the word out. And as individuals and as LEAs and schools are learning more about Elevate, they're finding it much more attractive. So it's not another thing. It's really to assist those non-Title I schools that need additional resources with this type of flexibility. Did I get all 3 of your questions?
Yeah. And so then your team in the past has had more schools than you have available slots. So the selection criteria, you might have that up on the screen or on one of the other screens. What does that look like?
So there's an application process that will be part of the materials that all principals that are eligible. So all the non-Title I schools that are TSI, ATSI will receive an email from me with an application packet. The application packet consists of 3 questions, including assurances from the LEA or charter authority that they will participate for the 4 years. They understand if they leave early, they may have to pay the money back. The application is really very simple. It's like, what are you going to do with these funds to drive improved learning and growth of your TSI, ATSI group? So there's an application and there's a team that reviews the applications, and then we make a recommendation to the USBE board. And if you go to the next slide, I have the timeline, I believe, up here. So there will be the introductory letter, the application packets, and then you'll see the applications are due actually at March 22nd, which is a Friday. I know that some schools or LEAs will be on break that next week, some the following week, but we would love to be able to be in a position where we go to the USBE board for approval the 1st of May, and then we'll be able to announce those. I didn't answer one of your questions in terms of resources. We are able, because of the way the Elevate program is set up, is to use all of the funds. And then if we do find ourselves with additional funds, that's why we expanded to 7 schools this last year, is that we were able to find some additional monies to support that.
Can I ask, how does this differ? I guess, or what are the big pieces that are different from this Elevate program than like A to A?
Oh, great question. So the biggest difference is that the Elevate program is based on the comprehensive needs assessment and root cause analysis that's done at the school level. So it's not just focusing on specific protocols like A2A is working with multilingual learners as an example. This would be if a school is identified, non-Title I identified with students with disabilities, this will be an opportunity for that school to use their funds differently to address some of those needs. What we find is that most of the schools that are in Elevate for multilingual learners, some in multiple areas where they're looking at some ethnic group as well as or ethnicity and multilingual and or students with disabilities. So in some schools, I have 5 ATSI or TSI groups. So those schools are doing a more comprehensive approach where, let me just pause there for a second, see if that's clear.
Yes.
Sorry.
Greg, I would add also that assessment to achievement is open to every single school in the state too. So
So this is my one particular school that I'm thinking about that,
yeah.
So we, sorry, I'm using, we do have at least 2 or 3 of the 13 Elevate schools that are also in A2A. So those schools, as they looked at what their needs were, realized that the A2A program and what A2A offers is not only sufficient, but it's very focused on their needs and what they are trying to accomplish. So, but what I just want to emphasize, the needs assessment and root cause analysis is really what drives the school improvement planning table that the school then is going to upload into Utah Grants, and that's what activates everything.
And I will add as well that Greg's team and the assessment to achievement team, when we do encounter overlap where schools can participate in one or the other, we meet to really discuss, what would our recommendation be for what would be best with this school and engage that school's leadership in those conversations and everything. So we've done that already with quite a few schools. As we're recruiting for a new cohort for assessment to achievement. And if you would like to explore those options, just reach out to both of us because we've been in communication a bunch as both programs, this program's launching and as the new cohort for A to A is launching as well.
Excellent. So if you would go to the next slide, just to that point, please feel free to reach out. I meet individually with schools and superintendencies about the program. If they have further questions and want to go know more about what other schools are doing as well. And just to let you know, so we have Elevate schools in Alpine, Murray, Granite, Salt Lake City, Davis, Iron County, Weber, and I have a charter school, which I'm very excited about as well. So we have a number of LEAs that are represented. I'm really looking for, hint, more schools in the South or in the Central. I've been talking with a couple of folks to encourage them to apply. So please, if I can be of any assistance to you, and if the biggest thing, my biggest ask is if you can push this information up as well as push it out to the schools that you work directly with, because it's just about getting word of mouth beyond that and letting people know this is available to them. So I apologize again for being late, and you got to see why I need to get in shape.
Yeah. Actually, I think I told you, Greg, that you'd probably come up about 9:15 and we were at 9:10, I think, when you pulled at the door. Yeah.
So that was going, I went here first, I told them, everything's closed. Then I get downstairs thinking, oh my gosh, then I ran back up.
I had just barely closed the door. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Greg. Before you leave, though, let's give one more chance for anybody online to ask any questions in the chat. Nothing? Okay. All right. Thank you, Greg. All right. We also have Malia with us today, who is, I consider Malia maybe the agency's top expert in many ways, especially when we start talking about data and making sure that we are processing our data correctly. So we're grateful to have Malia with us, and we'll turn the time over to you.
Great. Thanks for that lovely introduction. So I am officially a member of the special ed team as a statistician, data steward, and the special ed assessment data the assessment data that affects special ed the most is what we report to EdFacts. And I know that the assessment or the accountability assessment rules are what are most widely known among LEAs, and the EdFacts rules, business rules for how we report that, are a little more of a mystery. So I'm here today to help explain one of the items in that is actually kind of a newer item in it. And we're just trying to achieve better participation rates as they get reported to EdFacts. And in particular, what I have to share here today will hopefully help improve LEA's participation rates. Okay, so this first slide here is just a view of what we share in the UTREC specifications for how part-time codes are supposed to be reported. And this was updated a few years ago. The S code used to say it was only for 12th graders who are enrolled part-time because they only have a few credits left to do or whatever reason. We actually expanded that, and S is now kind of the catch-all for students who are enrolled for part-time for one reason or another that isn't because they're attending homeschool part-time or private school part-time, because there are a lot of scenarios that are perfectly allowed for a student to be enrolled part-time. So we have these 3 different codes, and hopefully you have all of those available in your SIS system for reporting students who are enrolled part-time. Okay, so I'm actually going to touch on 3 different reasons why it's really important that part-time codes are reported accurately and thoroughly. So the first one, when we identify whether a student is mobile, we actually changed that in the 2021 school year. We used to just look at their total membership over the course of the year. And basically, if they weren't full academic year, if they had less than 160 days of total membership across the school year, we identified them as mobile. And we were over-identifying mobility. For example, with part-time students, we don't expect them to have 160 days of membership. They would be, their membership is supposed to get prorated. So even if they attend 180 days of the school year, but they're only attending for half the day, we would only expect them to have 90 days of membership. And their 90 days of membership is a student who isn't mobile. Mobile is supposed to identify students who've moved during the school year. They're switching schools. It's disruptive to their educational experience. And so it ends up being an important indicator in research and analysis of trying to hone in on things that negatively impact outcomes. So we updated the way we identify mobility. And one of the things that was part of that update is if they're part-time, we no longer identify them as mobile just simply based on that 160-day amount. Okay, and then a second item. And so I initially started saying mostly I'm going to talk about EdFacts, but there is an ESSA accountability element here that's impacted by the part-time codes. And in the accountability technical manual, if you read that carefully, it does say that students who aren't FAY, full academic year, but are part-time, we can include them in ESSA accountability. If they're a participant, student enrolled, say maybe taking only math in your LEA because they're part-time and they take their other courses through private school or homeschool, you should still deserve to get the credit for that student as being a participant. They should absolutely be included in your assessment, your ESSA assessment accountability. So getting that part-time code marked accurately is going to help us be sure that we can include them in your accountability. Okay, and then finally, the meat of what I came here to talk about, the EdFacts data. So if you're ever curious about the EdFacts business rules for how we have to report that data, there's actually 6 different specification documents to look into. The ones listed here are the specifications for the participation files, which are the 185, the 188, and the 189. And then the proficiency versions of those are just 10 digits lower. So we have 175, 178, and 179. But probably the most important point in the participation business rules from the specifications is where it instructs on which students should be reported in this file. And it says, include all students enrolled during the testing window. This means include all students enrolled, whether or not they were present for the full academic year, and students who did not participate in the assessments due to significant medical emergencies. So basically what it says here is anyone who is enrolled during the assessment window has to be included in the EdFacts file. So we don't get to exclude opt-outs. We don't exclude, we're not supposed to exclude anyone according to those rules. And the EdFacts files we report for grades 3 through 10 in math and language arts, and for grades 4 through 10 in science. Okay, so we do actually deviate a little bit from the EdFacts business rules. So we don't include foreign exchange students in there. And then for DLM, the alternate assessment, we identify a student to be as expected to test for an alternate assessment if they had the 1% flag on their Scram record, and that Scram record was active during the assessment window. And then, so they're expected to have a alternate assessment, although if they have a RISE or Utah Aspire Plus with proficiency levels, we'll use that instead of the DLM. And then for RISE and Utah Aspire Plus, we use a little bit of different rules for part-time and full-time students. Okay, so for RISE and Utah Aspire Plus, for full-time students, if the student is enrolled during the testing window, then we expect them to have tests. They go in the denominator of your participation rate for all 3 subject areas, even if they're not taking tests, even if they don't have courses in all 3 subject areas. So for example, if we have an 8th grader who's enrolled full-time, but they're only taking math and they don't have any ELA or science classes, they still get included in the denominator for all 3 subject areas for your participation rate. Now for part-time students, if they have one of those part-time codes reported, then we can identify them as part-time, and then that's when we look at their courses. So for part-time students, we only include them in the denominator for a subject area if they have a course record for that subject area that would have triggered a test. So for example, we have a homeschool student who's reported with that part-time H code. And if they're only taking a math course, we only include them in the denominator for the math participation rate. And we don't include them in the denominator for science and language arts. And so this right here is why it's important to make sure you get those part-time codes reported, because if you don't, you could be taking a hit on your science and language arts participation rate for the student that you don't need to be taking. Okay, so and then EdFacts has a few caveats that I always like to mention. So the specifications, if it's a file where it says you have to report an unduplicated count, that means we can only include each student once per report, so per subject area. And so if, let's say a student has 8th grade math plus they have secondary math 1, we have to pick one of those records to submit. We can't submit both test results. And so we use tiebreakers, and basically what we do is we try to give preference to the assessment result where the student's going to be a participant if they have a result where they are and a result where they aren't a participant. And then if both results are participants, then we try to give preference to the one that's proficient if they have one that's proficient and one that's not. And if both tests are participants and they're both proficient, then it has to do kind of with the LEA, the school where they were enrolled for more of the year. Okay, and then so I mentioned that the EdFacts data is really important to your special ed team. So the Office of Special Education Programs has some measures, accountability measures. Indicator 3 is the measure that looks at assessment, participation, and proficiency rates. And these are really high stakes for your special ed department. And so that's why I am the one that am here presenting this, because I spend a lot of time in this world of EdFax data.
Question.
Yes, thank you.
What happens if a part-time student takes ELA first semester and math second semester, and neither subject is for the whole year?
Good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that off the top of my head. So it would, it would depend does the enrollment record itself, not the course record, is that active as of the end during the test session? So if they took that, if they took those two classes, the first trimester, second trimester, and then that was the end of their enrollment, they exited your school before the test window started, then they wouldn't end up being in the denominator for any of the subject areas. But I believe if they are still enrolled, they would end up being in the denominator for those two subject areas where they had courses. But
For RISE, there would be a mid-year summative test that the ELA that they could take, but for Utah Aspire Plus, because it's grade-based, there wouldn't be a test they could take. So if that helps a little bit too.
yeah, I'll have to double check the business rules for that one.
And Malia, on your previous slide, you may want to bring up about the fact that the rules don't match. One more back. The EdFax business rules don't match the ESSA ones, because that's the number one question we get all the time.
Yes. Yes, thanks for bringing that up. Yes. So mostly it's that for the participation rate that everybody gets included in the denominator. Opt-outs get included in the denominator. Transferred before testing window gets included in the denominator. All the participation codes that are excluded from ESSA accountability, they don't get an automatic exclusion from EdFax.
Yeah, and one of the areas that we talked about recently this year that kind of we got illuminated on is students who are first time enrolled in the US, even, for accountability, there's specific rules about how they're going to count. But for as far as EdFax, they expect to see those students included in the denominator.
Yeah, so there is one exception in the ELA EdFax file. If it's the students who entered after April 15th, that school year, they get included in this category LEP participant. And so they get counted as a participant because of the fact that they're going to end up taking a English language proficiency assessment, and that gets count instead of having to take the RISE or Utah Aspire Plus language arts. So that's the one difference in those first year English learners. It's that's the 103 code right the after April 15th enrolled. Okay, and my contact information was on that last slide, so feel free to email me if you have any specific questions about the business rules, or if your special ed department needs help with identifying the students that end up being included in their indicator 3 data.
Yeah, we'll wait a moment just to see if there's any other questions for Malia. Those of you who are in our meeting who also have responsibilities around special ed, this EdFax, OSEP is really familiar to you. And many of you who are with us, probably EdFax is something you might have heard the term a few times. We don't talk about it directly in assessment accountability. But obviously we have overlap because the proper use of the part-time enrollment codes is important clearly to EdFax and our special education partners, but also for us in assessment accountability, as well as your business department, because funding decisions are sometimes, funding flows based on enrollment codes being entered correctly. So we have this shared value of making sure that the staff in your schools understand the right way to code and are being detailed in the way that they code enrollment. That be kind of summarize the main point of you taking your time to join us today is to, again, focus in on those enrollment codes being done correctly.
Yeah, I think the more teams across LEAs that are aware of how important this is, the more likely we are to get the message out to make sure that coding these part-time, taking the time to code those part-time codes correctly is very important.
All right. Well, thank you, Malia. You're welcome to stay with us if you'd like, or move on to other things.
Thank you.
The door's only locked from the outside, so you're. All right, Kim.
You can change the slide. Couple things as we move into our test administration season. This is a repeat to everything we talked about last year, just so you know, like you're gonna go, I think I've seen this before, you have. But it's a really important reminder about the fact that we do have language translation guidance for our summative assessments. Last week I got to go to math item writing, and the whole idea that we have Spanish adaptive tests became like a huge topic. We were in a room full of math teachers who had no idea. To the point where they were like, how did we know? How would we know this? And they were across the board, RISE and Utah Aspire Plus. So this is kind of a little nudge, like if you guys haven't been messaging this, your students could be taking a hit because they are eligible to take their Spanish adaptive, as well as for students who have other languages, there are provisions for them to be provided with a translator to complete their test. The WIDA guidance is all listed here. As a reminder, we don't get our current access scores until like May 2nd. So you're using their data for last year, when you're looking at their eligibility, make sure that you look at what the eligibility is. It's listed very specifically in the test administration manuals, as well as online. We have this under the assessment directors tab on our website as well. And of course, they're now on these slides. And I will also add this to the next AD memo, just so everyone's aware. But it's essential that the teachers understand that they can do this. And the big questions that we had were, who decides? How do we know? And they don't know. And so it's probably something that you might want to be working with your school admins and stuff like that. Hal has a question. Can somebody unmute him?
Can you hear me okay, Kim?
Yeah, we can hear you, Hal.
Would you please define what is the Spanish transadaptive test in RISE? Because I see there being two ways to have Spanish support, and I think we mingle them together, and I think they're very different, right? One is you have to have the requirements you're laying there, but there's a simple toggle that students can go back and forth and look at some Spanish words if they want to.
Yeah, you have to still set them. Yeah, thanks, Hal. Elise is actually going to be talking about Spanish adaptive when she gets to her slides. But the thing to remember is the Spanish toggle only appears for students who have been identified and qualify. It's not like any student taking RISE can just toggle to the Spanish version of the test, because frankly, as a teacher who taught 7th, 8th, and 9th graders, I can't imagine that wouldn't have been my worst nightmare ever. Remember that everything has to be set correctly and tied in order for the adaptive test to show up. So it's not just they can just do it, but the students themselves can toggle back and forth if they feel like it's easier. Because remember, when you're an English learner, especially and Spanish is our language where we have more than 5% of our population, which is why that's the only language offered embedded within our assessments. The thing to remember with that is that the students they get control of that. With Utah Aspire Plus, it's an actual Spanish form. There is not a toggle that they get to switch before, which is why, and I'll say this because Elise will say it again, this is why it is so essential that any student who is taking any sort of accommodated assessment needs to be logged in to the training and practice test in both platforms under the secure browser form so that their accommodations are enabled. That's the only way they are. And have them practice with the teacher, make sure that everyone's familiar with, is it working correctly? Does it show correctly? And with Utah Aspire Plus, they can only take the specific trainings once for each in the secure browser for each test. So you'll want to make sure that you're coordinating that in your school. So like the math teachers are giving the math test, the ELA teachers are giving the ELA test, and the science teachers are giving the science test. With RISE, it doesn't matter. They can do it as many times, but that's the most important thing. Does that help, Hal? You can type it in the chat since I don't know if you're unmuted again, but. And the reason why we're doing hand raising, you guys, is we've had some Zoom attacks. And so now we have to go to, it's a new agency security thing. So those of you who are used to being just on mute and saying stuff, that's why you have to raise your hand. We didn't clarify that at the beginning. Okay, next slide. Then, and just so you know, here are the guidelines. I put the links in the chat, and the also the translation form for you. If the students need to have the script read in a language other than English, they do need to test in a separate location so that they're not, that it's not distracting. Remember, the whole goal here is to encourage student success. And when students are in an environment where it's really distracting and somebody's speaking another language and there's stuff going on all the time and people are coming in and out, that is really it's frustrating. Think how you feel when it gets too busy. So that's one of the things you want to think about. You want to definitely review the test administration manuals for both RISE and Utah Aspire Plus. They give very specific guidance about this, and it's in there. And then here's the most important thing, which we love that we had Malia come to talk about participation codes. You're going to hear a lot about them this meeting. You're going to hear a lot about them next meeting as well. And that is, don't forget to enter code 201 for all tests that are accommodated for Spanish adaptive or any translated summative forms. Code 201, it is still an accommodated test. And it's important to do it with Spanish as well as any other translated test, in addition to any other accommodations, which Jessica will get into a little bit more. The translation request form does not have to be sent to me if it's for Spanish. It's embedded in the system, but every other language, that form has to be sent to me with, this is why they get it. And remember, the most important thing is, how have they been receiving some translated services instructionally? And that means, Google Translate, it's not actually instructionally appropriate all the time, because the translation isn't always accurate. So remember that you're in that form, you have to explain, what have they been doing? What have you been doing? Because it's really unfair to have a student suddenly have some translated service. They've never had any experience with that on a summative test. So remind people that that's one of the ideas. We want to make this a fair experience for all our teachers.
So Kim, can I speak to your accommodated?
Sure, absolutely.
What does that do for growth or participation? How does that impact that whole accountability if it's a 201 code?
They don't accommodate, they don't count against you. It just means that indicates it. It's the test is modified, it reduces it, but code 201 does not hurt. So it just means this was an accommodated form. It doesn't affect your participation. It just says when we pull records, these are the students who have had accommodated tests.
So they count.
They don't count against, I don't know. They don't count against you in accountability. It's not like if you don't put the code in, it hurts you. Explain it.
That's correct. Yes, students are allowed accommodations that they have in their IEP. And 201 helps us know that a student was provided with the accommodations, that the test was given with allowed accommodations. Modified is an unallowed breaking of standardization. So that's where a modified test has a penalty, but an accommodated test does not.
And modified would be if you're giving a student an accommodation that's not allowable, that's outlined in the test administration manual. That question I know has come into Tracy this week from several people. If you were testing that student without an allowable accommodation that's outlined in the test administration manual, or that's been approved by the state for an exceptional accommodation request, because the accommodations that are listed in any TAN, that's a non-exhaustive list. There's always extenuating circumstances that might not be outlined, and you always, of course, would advocate for your student. And we have a specific form online, exceptional accommodations request. So as long as it's been approved, that's fine. It becomes modified when it's not an allowable accommodation. And they're different for each test. So teams have to be aware of what those differences are in each platform.
So if it's modified and it wasn't approved, right, like
That
what some
counts
people
against-
do.
It does count against you.
Counts against students. But 201 just means it was a different form, and we use that data when we're trying to see how many have students been receiving the accommodations they're entitled to, how many students are completing a Spanish adaptive test. You know, they're used for other levels of data than just that. So it's really important that code 201 gets entered and 202 for modified. So, and I think it's 202, right? In my head, that could be the wrong code, but I think it's 202. I don't have them in front of me. I always have them on my wall.
No, you're correct, Kim. I've got,
Question before we move on, 202, if someone modifies, you find a teachers modified a test without getting an approval, we do 202. And so if it's a state approved accommodation, we also do 202?
No.
No,
State
201.
approved is
201.
201.
It's,
Okay.
yeah, if it's state approved.
Thank
we
you for
give that
clarifying
approval.
that.
And Brad said if 201 doesn't make any difference for accountability, why are we having to track it? All other adaptations are not reported this way, extra time, different test settings. Yes, you are supposed to enter code 201 for all of those as well, Brad. All tests where students get a different accommodation, we don't worry about extended time for RISE because it's an untimed test. We don't, that doesn't have to be adapted. But in Utah Aspire Plus, extended time has to be coded 201.
And that's where it goes back to the test administration manuals. You have to know those differences between RISE and Utah Aspire Plus because there's not alignment across this testing, just like the timing, it's different.
And so it's really important that, you know, the thing about this, you guys, is this is accurate. This is accuracy. When you're looking at your data, you want to have accurate data. Participation codes aren't just for us, they're actually for you as well. So that's part of where that comes from. So, yeah. Oh, thanks. And somebody asked, does the language toggle only to Spanish or other languages? It's only Spanish. Brad, I just answered that. What do we do with the data? We do, I mean, Tracy's not here, but you want to answer what we do with code 201 data and what we look at for EL students and accommodated forms? I mean, Spanish, the special ed department uses them for different things.
Well, so we use it for internal monitoring of students receiving the accommodations that they are entitled to. For us, it tells us the number of, you know, it's beneficial for us to be able to see, like Kim said, the number of students that are receiving accommodations. We have to report via peer review that schools are providing accommodations. That level of specificity helps us just to differentiate. This is the number of students statewide who were given accommodations that were allowed in the test. So it doesn't really have any impact on you at the LEA level, to my knowledge. But for us, it's just used for internal data analysis and peer review.
And you may use it. I would encourage you to be looking at your are you matching
It's
up your
interesting.
IEP levels and your EL access and screener data? Is that matching what you're seeing in your data?
That is a really good point, Kim, because as an LEA, you are obligated to provide students with the accommodations that are in their IEP. And if you can go back and see that a 201 code was assigned, you can pretty safely make an assumption that the students were provided with the accommodations that they are entitled to. Would you add anything?
yeah, I was just going to remind everybody on the meeting that in the accountability technical manual, Appendix A contains the full list of codes and their effect on reporting, the description of those codes, and also the reminder that the LEA is responsible for assigning the participation codes. You know, Malia's left now, but these little details that sometimes we think, well, does it make a big difference if I code this field correctly or what? Sometimes we get asked to complete a task. I think about forms that I get and I think, well, I don't know, the answer seems like this to me. And I don't recognize the unintended consequences for me putting a response into a field that I don't fully understand. And that can happen with these participation codes too. So I would encourage all of our LEA friends to become familiar, if you're not, with that Appendix A, those participation codes. And then before the end of the testing window, make sure that your students in your LEA all have the appropriate participation code assigned to their test record.
Can I ask a question about that too? If a student applies for, excuse me, an extended accommodation on the ACT, is that something historical data that might contribute to that, to have in place?
I'm gonna maybe defer to Scott. To my knowledge,
There are no participation codes for ACT.
yeah, we don't apply participation codes to ACT. All of that is managed with ACT directly through the accommodations approval process.
Okay, I'm just wondering, because we do have students who qualify for extended time on ACT. I just didn't know if they look into that historical data to approve that extended time, to say, oh, you've had 201 code in the
Yeah,
past.
for ACT
or-
requirements, they just have to have it on their plan because they might not have had it as a 10th grader, but as long as it's on their plan that you're submitting, whether that be an IEP plan, 504 plan, English learner plan, if they have a medical plan, as long as their ACT is only looking for alignment between the instructional services that students are receiving and how they will
Okay,
receive that on
I
the
just thought
test.
that might be even more reason to make sure you have that code in there.
Yeah, your question though, this line of discussion is, I think, important for everybody to think about. And that is, some people probably wonder, why don't we put participation codes for the ACT, right? We have them for RISE and UTestBuyer Plus, and we're not required to track participation codes for students in the 11th grade taking the ACT. And that's primarily because it's not a ESSA aligned assessment. We do use ACT for post-secondary readiness in our accountability system, but the test itself is not one. All states aren't required to administer a college readiness test in 11th grade. That's part of our plan. But that would be the reason if people are wondering, well, why don't we put participation codes for that assessment too? Is it's not the same type of assessment. It doesn't fulfill the same federal requirements. And again, Malia started this conversation, how important the right codes are when we start talking about transferring data to the U.S. Department of Education.
You can click the next slide, Amy. A couple things, I'd like to thank, Yvonne's here, Emory's already scheduled theirs, and San Juan has already scheduled theirs, and I've heard from UTVA. Remember, we are doing assessment observations this year for UTestBuyer Plus, RISE, and DLM, because and everybody who has been, who we've asked to come and observe has already received email notifications from me. I need everyone who has received that email, including the charter schools, to respond to those emails back to me by February 28th. For the distance that we have to travel, because we're doing the Southeast School Council this year, we're going to be doing our observations just for San Juan, Grand, Emory, and Carbon. And Carbon, we may be able to just drive down one day, but for those school districts, we're going to do our observations between April 22nd and May 3rd. We are already booked now on the 23rd of April and the 24th and 25th of April from Carbon and Grand, if Jill and those guys are all listening. All the online schools who are administering remote summative tests, we are going to be coming to observe UTestBuyer Plus and RISE sometime between March 4th and May 15th. So I need your testing schedule so that we can come to your locations to observe. That is mainly because we want to make sure the system's working, and so we can provide more guidance next year. Since this is the first year we're doing this, we want to make sure that we're there to support you as much as possible. And so that's one of the things that we're doing. We do not observe ACT, by the way, unless we have a specific reason to. Last year we went to Stansbury High because they had switched from paper to online. The whole school district switched from paper to online. And since we're going to all online last year, next year we wanted to go and observe and see if there were any things that we would need to message to everyone when we go fully online next year. So thank you, Andy, for inviting us last year. Okay, next slide. Real quick, I always promise that I put the task calendar in here. Here's your February, March, and April. For those of it that apply, there's your link. So if you need to, if you're wondering if you're getting everything done, we do have several new ADs who have come on since we did our new AD training in the fall. Next slide. And we do have some assessment training dates. I'm not going to read all these to you, but they are scheduled. Our new assessment director webinar is going to follow the AD meeting. We'll give everybody a half hour for lunch. It will be Thursday, August 15th. And then we have UTIPS, RISE, and Apple training scheduled. Next slide. And then the Acadiance data trainings are also scheduled for next year, and Teresa has an extensive training schedule. We will not see Teresa and Jared for many, many weeks as we get onto the new system this year. But there are many trainings and they're reaching out to that individually. But we wanted to give you a heads up for any dates if you guys are trying to calendar with people. I was going to do a poll to see what dates would work the best for building connections starting in the fall, but we had so many slides, I said we could do that in March. So you may want to start thinking about that. When would that work the best for you? We are planning to do another building connections in your LEA. That has been really effective. We have noticed a marked reduction in confusion and stress, and we're hoping you saw, better communication. I got really good feedback on it, so we decided we'd do it another year for sure. So next slide. Okay, and that was everything. Thanks, everybody. If you have questions, of course, I'm already getting questions about testing ethics, all of that. You know how to reach me. So go ahead, Maureen.
Alrighty, in case you haven't heard, the summative testing window is opening soon. So I thought I'd give everybody just a quick overview of how our big assessments are rostered. So I'm going to start out with RISE. RISE is a course-based assessment. A student is rostered in RISE according to the courses they are assigned to in your LEA and the core codes. I have our two sort of most popular ways of scheduling. Elementary school students here, you can roster a student in just a homeroom or a homeroom with your individual subjects, language arts, math, science. We publish core code lists for you to see. I have samples at the bottom of this slide for each subject. You'll see a student enrolled in just a homeroom. That core code is on each individual list, language arts, math, science. If you're in that course, you're going to be rostered for all three assessments. If a student is split out, language arts, math, and science, you'll see those core codes. They're in the green on this slide. They are on each of those lists individually. And this rostering method goes across schools, across districts. If a student has that schedule with English, language arts, math in one school or district, and they're enrolled in another school or district in just a homeroom, those tiebreaker rules are going to apply across the board. So the English language, the English, math, science courses are going to win a tiebreaker every time, no matter what school a student is enrolled in. You'll also notice on our core code lists, we have highlighted all the core codes on there that will roster a student for every subject. So just a quick visual reference, if you see a highlighted core code on those lists, that core code is going to roster a student for all subjects. Next slide. So tiebreakers, I've combined these into one handy slide. You'll find these in this student assessment rostering manual, which we also have published. Like I said, RISE is course-based. First, they're going to look for what courses a student is enrolled in. Then those core codes are going to come into play. After that, if a student is enrolled in the exact same courses, exact same in schools, the SOEP courses are always going to win that tiebreaker. It's going to go down this list until we get finally down to just a yes or an A or B, the course section ID. For UA Plus is strictly a grade-based assessment. 9th and 10th graders are rostered for UA Plus. And then it will go down this list of tiebreakers to determine which school a student is going to roster at. You may notice right now that these tiebreakers aren't being applied in ADAM, the new rostering system. For UA Plus, we are still working out a few kinks in getting students rostered. We expect that those tiebreakers are going to be applied next week. So hopefully when you sign into ADAM next week, you'll see only students enrolled in one school. It's a very small portion right now that are still showing up as enrolled in more than one school, but we expect that to be taken care of very soon. Next slide. Just general reminders. It takes about 48 hours for a new student to roster for assessments. if their record has no errors. Sometimes it can take a little longer, but if your student is enrolled with no errors, just give them a little bit of time and they'll show up for assessment. You can check for errors on your UTREX overview page. Your error files are right there. If you or anyone in your LEA is having an issue with student rostering, please remember, we only need SSIDs to look up students. We don't need any other information. Any vendor's help desk, they also only would need an SSID. There's no need to share any other information than an SSID. And please, if you are forwarding on emails from teachers up the chain to us, please just be aware to edit out any other information besides SSIDs. Because we oftentimes see very long email chains that start off with name, SSID, home address, phone number, just all sorts of stuff. Yes, exactly. Social security number, whatever. So just be aware of all that information. Please try not to forward it on to everybody. Next slide. Core code list and student rostering manual. That's the only thing you ever need. All the information is there. I'm not even here. These are the new links from the new website, so they're fresh off the presses. Please look at them. They're great.
Bookmark them.
Bookmark them. Also, my laptop in particular does not like the new website. I have to clear my cache all the time. So if you have errors when you try to access these pages, please, you might just have to clear your cache. And as always, if you have any questions, please get in touch with me. That's what I'm here for. Happy to help. And that's it for me.
Yeah, and to the website point, just know that is still construction in process, right? It might be like when you have a school that you open and you aren't quite able to get everything done, but you're able to get the building permit. And they're still working on things for the next year.
One thing we love, Darren, you set that bar really low. You got the building permit. That's a little better.
We have a growing list of requests to the vendor of our new website for things that we're still needing. So it's lots of stuff still to come.
Growth opportunity.
Yes. Yes.
All right.
We're trying.
Do I need to do the mic or am I okay?
Jerry said it makes the audio much
It makes it
clearer.
more clear.
Okay. Will it just magically do stuff?
It's red. It's red and black.
Okay,
And the camera points to you when it's on.
lovely. Thanks. All right, Wina, here we go. Again, I can't tell you how many times I get people just asking questions on a daily basis about the changes in AMS, because we are in the throes of access testing. Please bookmark that bottom link. It is a website that is very helpful. It'll walk you through any and all things. I just search the topic in the search bar and it pulls up exactly what I need, and it'll walk me through all the steps on what I need to do in the new with the new changes in our assessment management system for access. Also, I would highly encourage you to contact DRC. They are very responsive and their customer service is excellent if you have questions, but this is probably the best source for help. It's new for us as well. We're still getting used to it and learning it. And I myself use this website almost on a daily basis because it's still all very new and different. And it does have a crosswalk for the old terms to the new terms. So you know exactly what each thing means. We don't have test sessions. We now have test registrations. So it'll just remind you the changes and how to navigate those changes. All right. Again, we are in the throes of testing. We have recently been just sending friendly little reminders. We're halfway through our testing window. So please make sure that you are getting testing done. Our reminders might get a little more aggressive or robust, still friendly in nature though, as testing goes on, because we do monitor testing. Firm, I like that. Everyone likes a good firm touch, right? I don't know. I'm sorry. It's, we'll be nice about it. Okay, moving on. But going back still, one thing that I do really want to remind though about the testing window is please remember that access testing, it is directly tied to a student's civil rights. I know people aren't ever psyched about saying, oh, I have the test or the right to test. But yes, you do. And so waiting till the last week to start testing really does not provide students with ample opportunity to engage in that right for testing. Because if the student comes up sick, absent for a day for any reason, where are there opportunities to make up that testing? We would really like to encourage you, start testing now, and make sure that those students really have the same opportunity to engage in that testing as all students have and should have. So again, friendly reminders, firm but friendly, coming out. And if you have questions or need help, just let us know, because we're here to support you. Also, as we get into the testing window and start to near the end, please reminder, if you are done with testing completely, pack up that stuff and ship it on back now. They can get started on scoring right away. If you're not done, but you've finished the writing tests for grades 1 through 3, please do not wait. Send those writing materials back, because this ensures there's no delays in scorings. You never know, as we experienced with certain shipping vendors at the beginning of testing season, sometimes things are delayed. Maybe shortage in staffing or weather. So the sooner you can send your materials back, the better to process shipping.
We have newcomers entering daily, so have been both screening and administering access. At what point can we just give the screener without also having to give access the last 5 days of the window?
Yep, that is a great question. Per our state's consolidated state ESSA plan, students that arrive during the school year, you have 10 school days to get that student screened. You are allowed to take up to those 10 days to screen the student. So our recommendation and guidance has been, if the student comes during the last 10 school days of the access testing window, then that student does not need to take access, because you can use those full 10 school days to screen the student. So our guidance is, unfortunately, if they come in the last 11 days, makes it a really tight turnaround, and we realize that, but the law is the law. But those 10 last school days of access testing is where you can really cut off taking both for those students. I know that's a lot to ask of these students, but just do the best you can with spreading it out for them, because we know testing fatigue happens, but let us know how we can support as well.
Yeah, it's a challenge, I'm sure. It's also important, I think, to look at it from the student's perspective and the instructional services that you'll be trying to provide to them from this time until a year from now. Well, actually more than a year from now, when you'd get the results from the following year's testing. So hopefully you see, and the student's able to understand, there's real value if you're able to test them before the window closes on an individual level, that's set aside from the ESSA requirements, and just having that information about their level of proficiency in those language domains, I think is important for them. That's why it's civil right for the student.
And I would add to that, we get a question, well, why can't we just have them take access then? But the law is the law, and the official process is you can't have a student engage in access without them being legally identified in the state of Utah with a screener, because you can't assume as soon as that student takes access, they're counting, right? So they have to be identified first.
You have another question. What do we do with the manuals and testing script? Do we ship it back?
Oh yeah, every single piece of material you get, you gotta ship on back. The only exception is if things are soiled. I'll let your imaginations go. That's what the directions always say. We don't want soiled materials. Have fun with that. But if you have something that is soiled, you do need to go into AMS, into the accountability, and explain why it's not being returned. So I will say, you can make the DRC.
If that happens, email me, I'll let you know.
So you can make the DRC folks laugh with your explanations, because every now and then, boy, do we get some interesting stories. So yes, everything must be returned, accounted for. If for some reason something cannot be returned, we have had instances where an employee of the district unknowingly shredded things and didn't realize it. You would need to explain that it has been securely destroyed. And even if you do have materials that have been damaged in some way, you are still expected to explain that you have secure destroyed those materials as well. And yeah, let us know your adventures in materials. All right, just again, a reminder about parental exclusion. It is not on the opt-out form. Please let us know if we can assist in those conversations with families and parents regarding this. But again, it's not on there. Do everything you can to provide the student with the opportunity to test. All right. And then I believe next up, we have a great new resource for, oh, no, I jumped the line. This is a great resource too. The new file layout is posted in AMS. So when you get your student response files, all your scores back, your initial ones, this will explain how all the data is laid out so you know exactly what you're looking at. I don't believe much has changed this year as far as the data file layouts, but if you are new to it and you're not quite familiar with the data file that you get, this will guide you through exactly what you're looking at once you get those files in AMS. All right, now, yay, this is the fun, exciting resource. I'm going to actually turn it over to Anne Michelle so she can talk about it, and we're excited. We've already been using this a ton since we just released it.
Yeah, that's correct. So with Mike on?
No.
Okay.
Oh, for me. With the change in exit criteria and the myriad of requirements for EL students, we realized we were long overdue for putting out some easy to follow, clear guidance about home language survey, screening, risk and assessment requirements. And so this is a brief document. We originally were calling it a one-pager. I don't think it's one page. I think it's like a 4-pager. 4 pages. But it's a really clear outline of requirements that we especially had like your office administrators in mind, that this is something they could have on hand to refer to about, okay, this student enrolled, what is the process for what triggers screener? It has to be triggered by the home language survey, for example. No other observation or last name can trigger screener, only the home language survey. So it clarifies those kinds of things, but we hope that this will be a useful document for you that you can use widely with all levels of staff in your LEA, from the district office to school secretaries. Maybe you can add whatever you like.
I would just add, you'll note that we have announced this already. Normally, this group is the first group to get all of this released first. We do know in the past you have asked, please make sure you share all this stuff with all the other groups. The way that all the meetings fell this month, your meeting kind of came last, so we apologize that this wasn't issued to you first. Last week, we brought it to the special education directors in the UC meeting. They were the first, which normally they're the last to get it. So they were really excited to be the first. And then the ALS directors, they got it last Friday. And then you're having this now. So again, please send this out to all colleagues that this could pertain to. It really does answer the most frequent questions we get. But yeah, we tried to do a lot of that messaging and communication lifting for you, but apologies that you got it last. We saved the best for last though.
Yeah, and just to emphasize again that we really do rely on you as the avenue for getting this information to the right people, and are so appreciative of your efforts to do that. And this is one document that we think is useful for a massive variety of staff in your LEA. And yeah, we're really excited to have something this concise and clear, because it's a complex sequence of things that need to take place, but this is really nicely put together. So thanks to Megan for her work on that as well.
There's also information in there about alternate.
Yep.
That Tracy, this was a group document that Tracy, Megan, and Michelle, and I edited it.
Which we love your editing because it really helps for clarification for everyone. This is a living document. So if questions arise, it's guidance. So if we need to clarify more on certain areas, or if you're like, oh, but it doesn't address this that we didn't realize, please give us feedback, because we want to make it the best, source of truth for all of you.
We designed it specifically to help at the registration process level. And so those are the people that need access to this guidance, because in the audit, that was what is identified as people missing what they were supposed to do or not understanding what they were supposed to do. And we had multiple students who didn't get screened, then got screened, multiple times. And, there were multiple examples of that. So we want to make sure that everyone's receiving the services that they get. So. Okay, and Tracy is at a conference, and so I'm supposed to handle the DLM slides, and so let's see how well I do. Anyway, just so you know, a quick reminder, the DLM testing window opens March 11th and it closes June 7th, which is the week prior to your last day of school. And remember, best practice with DLM, unlike RISE and Utah Aspire Plus, where we set that 8-week window, best practice is to give them the entire time to get their DLM testing done, understanding the population. Okay, so that's an important thing. Next slide. There is a little checklist for test administrators and teachers. This checklist is really important that everyone needs to follow. You have to accept the security agreement from the educator portal. You have to complete the required test administrating training tests. Unlike our other tests, with DLM, there is an actual test that the test administrator has to pass for DLM in order to be able to administer the test. You want to make sure that all the students are rostered. You need to make sure that all the first contact surveys have been completed and returned for the student, and that the PNP, or personal needs and preferences thing, has been completed as well. And the DLM administration for teachers Padlet, there's the link right there. And it's also sent out every single week when we don't have AD meeting in our AD memos. There is an actual link right to the Padlet. And so you can go ahead and use that as well. Okay, next slide. For test coordinators, this moves up the chain. Remember that you need to create Cactus accounts and you use the Cactus ID as the unique educator identifier. We're all getting used to the fact that Cactus is how we know who everyone is, so make sure you do that. You want to create your rosters. There is an information, the DLM District Users Resources Padlet has all of this information and it shows how you can create your DLM user accounts and the student enrollment and all of those things. This is really important. You need to make sure that you check, is 1%, the 1% flag in your SIS system for students who are going to complete the DLM. This is important for two reasons. It identifies them that they have to take DLM and then they don't also get like a RISE or Utah Aspire Plus test administered to them, and then you have to do more stuff in the background. Just setting that flag on time will help a lot. You do want to check the security agreements and the required training status. Make sure that they're doing what they need to be doing before they're going to administer the test. And then obviously the status of first contact surveys and PNP status, and then you're going to monitor testing progress. Tracy does this from her side as well, but it's a really important thing. And there are specific Padlets for each role. There's one for teachers, there's one for DLM district users as well. Next slide. There is, you can cheat, I'm not going to go through this. This is more the training so that you can see how you can check the training status data, how you can actually download this for district level people. This is where you click in and you can actually see that. And you definitely want to look at that because, go ahead and click the next slide. All of this information is required before students can actually complete their tests. And so this needs to get taken care of as soon as possible so that on March 11th, the teachers are ready to start testing. So this is something that right now, and it's on the task calendar as well. This is something that everyone should be monitoring and checking with everyone in their districts. Next slide. I loved Tracy's reaction when pulling the data. We had a conversation about this week even, and that is that there are almost 4,000 students as of last February 8th, which is last week, that did not have their first contact survey completed. There are over 1,000 that haven't rostered for ELA, 1,000 that haven't rostered for math, and 945 students who haven't rostered for science. Remembering, of course, that third graders don't take science. So if there was a hot item that I would say based on Tracy's reaction, as you can see in the slide, this would be something that you need to start checking today. And she was going to give me an updated slide, but she ended up having to get to airport faster yesterday. So we could give you more specific numbers, but I think 1,000 students is a red flag. Okay, next slide. This is another thing that's really important that we're starting to discover that less and less teachers are completing all of the requirements they need, like they're not actually reviewing the test administration manuals. For DLM, they're not looking at the tips pages. And every single testlet for a student has an information page, and they are required to look at every tip before they administer the testlet to the students. They need to look at it. They can choose to print it if they want to, and it has to be destroyed after the testlet is completed. But this is part in the test administration testing ethics policy. This is unique. This is, every single test has specific guidance that is required to be followed. That's why in the test administration policy, it's very specific, like you have to follow the TAM. This tip process is part of the DLM process. So it's important. Yeah.
Yeah, and we can actually see a record of that.
Yeah.
Tracy can go in and see if teachers have access.
That's on the next slide. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And she's monitoring this year and will be reporting because it's becoming such a big concern to DLM and as well as to, those of us who monitor testing.
Students too, in order for you to administer it correctly and have value in how the student responds, you need to be familiar with that guidance that they're providing you, to the benefit of the student.
Exactly. Next slide. And here's the list. This is why, in case anybody says to you, why do I have to do it for every single tip, every single testlet, is because each one is a unique test. And remember that just like we all like to do hints for those people who do video games, everybody always knows the cheat codes, right? The tips is kind of the cheat codes for the test to help the students know what they need to do. They know whether it's a teacher or or computer delivered testlet, the essential element and the linkage level, the materials that they need and how to use the materials and suggested substitute materials in case those aren't available. Accessibility supports that aren't allowed so that you don't get a modified test. Okay, the alternate test for read aloud and if familiar text is used and the name of the text. And it's in the educator portal guide on page 50. You can click on that link and it'll take you exactly where you need to go in DLM. Next slide. And this is just so you know, like when we said we can see it, she decided to start calling it out a little bit. 50% of the DLM test administrators last year were new teachers, which means that they would have even less familiarity with the process than teachers who have done it. So it's even more critical that they need to do that. And 70% of the testlets that were administered across the state, and the teacher did not access the tip. They just started giving the test. And we are going to be monitoring this and reaching out to you. So you'll get some firm emails perhaps from Tracy. And then the overall, and here's one of the critical pieces here, and that is that the overall proficiency in DLM decreased from last year. And you know, from 2022 to 2023, it went down in both ELA and math. And obviously sometimes having a teacher that's less experienced can influence what's happening instructionally in the classroom. But even more so, if they're not following the test administration rules, that's going to impact the experience for the student, which can also negatively impact the scores that they receive. So this is a critical piece, this TIPS monitoring, and it's bad enough now that it is now going to be, you know, they're going to be watched. She's going to be watching. It's really her, and then she brings it to me.
And then just like what you said earlier when she was talking, how data like affects people across school. This affects your special education department because this impacts their indicator 3 data that they are monitored for in special education. So these things lower the proficiency of students with disabilities. In indicator 3D shows the students' gap scores and it's comparing their performance over students without disabilities. So there is like a direct correlation of this information and how it ties into data and how it impacts special education indicators that they report.
Thanks, Jess. Next slide. And here's just the link to where the Padlets are. You notice that there's district users. There's also the teacher level. Go ahead, next slide. And if you have any questions, of course, you can always reach out to Tracy. And then you'll also want to bookmark these 2 pages. And remember, these are the links to the new website. So if you've been bookmarking them before, and again, the whole clear your cache, try all the things. It's a magical experience for all of us. So
Yeah. So we're almost halfway through on our time, and we're right at the halfway point on our number of slides. So I think it'd be a great time to take a break. If we're okay with that, let's come back together at 10:35. So it'd be a 8-minute break.
Yes. I have not let kids do. Okay. Yes, like my, I sent you pictures.
Okay, we're good. Okay, we're good.
Welcome back.
Not patient enough for that, Emily.
Teresa, we'll go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Okay, just letting you know that we are going ahead and working on revising the PEEP entry this spring, and we will be revising the PEEP exit in the fall. So we've invited some preschool educators around the state to participate, and we will extend invitations in the fall for the PEEP exit. So just a heads up that will be in effect we're hoping the PEEP entry will be in effect for this fall. We will let you know exactly. So that's our anticipated timeline, is that the revision will go into place for this fall 2024. Then for the KEEP, just a couple of things to be aware of. So the KEEP will no longer be required after this school year. And that means that LEAs are just kind of thinking about that KEEP entry, thinking for next year that KEEP entry might be given in the spring. For some LEAs may choose to do that as part of their spring roundup type thing, and that PEEP will be being given at the same exact time. So those students, we really don't want them to be taking the same assessment within, weeks of each other, especially because our PEEP assessment is tied to a lot of grant funding. And so just making sure that you are working with local district and community programs to ensure that students aren't being given the same assessment twice in a matter of weeks. So that's should not be an issue for this year because the KEEP assessment is required for this year, but moving forward, that could be an issue. Next slide. And then Acadians. So we have lots of instructions around this still. So downloading your historical data. So for MClass, you will want to download your benchmark and pathways of progress data, and also your correlation report, downloading your effectiveness of instruction data. So ALO is currently working on getting the effectiveness of instruction historical data, but I don't know exactly when that will be available. So download your effectiveness of instruction data so you have that information for your early learning plans as needed. And then within ADM, that benchmark and pathways of progress data will be moved over to ALO by Acadians, but you will still want to download your effectiveness of instructional support levels for reading and or math, just to make sure that you have that data in time when it might be needed for your early learning plans. And then I do have exact outlined instructions in a document that will be referenced in a couple of slides. So next slide, thank you. Oh, this slide. So the Acadians vendor change FAQ document has a lot of questions and answers, and it does include those specific directions for downloading your historical data. So like step by step, this is what you need to do. It does give guidelines for naming all of those documents, because if we're sending literally thousands of documents to ALO, we're going to request that everybody formats the naming in the same way so it's easy for them to upload it and quickly and efficiently. It also, there is information about the specs for assessment administration devices. So if you're wondering what devices are going to work, what we need, there is a document referenced in there as well that provides that information. So that would be a good one to get over to your IT staff and just making sure you're prepared for that.
Teresa, you're going to be sending this out multiple times in AD memos, right?
Yes, it's going to be coming out. And I'm also sending it to literacy directors sometime within the next week. It'll go out to literacy directors as well. So just some, did the videos not
Just you
load? Okay.
Just click out there.
Yeah. So I just wanted to just show you a little bit of the differences in scoring. So what ALO looks like. So these are like 30-second clips of what it looks like, just to give you an idea. So go ahead and just play one. Hopefully. Oh. No, it's not going to happen right now. I'm going to have to go find the videos and give permission. So I will send that out later just so that you can see those differences in scoring and maybe I'll try and fix it. We can come back to it. So, and then we have lots and lots and lots of training, and I appreciate all of those who did fill out that survey. We still had about, I think, 25 or so LEAs that haven't completed that survey, and we just want to make sure that we're going to have enough sessions available for everybody. So at this point, scheduling an online or in-person training is not possible. Our calendars are very, very full. I literally have every single day in August filled with some type of training or AD meeting. And then, but we would like to make sure that we have enough online sessions available throughout summer and springtime for people. So if you have not completed that, I will be sending that out as well. So on the slide, you can see we are doing an overview training session. It's just 2 hours on March 6th. It's really meant for assessment directors and LEA staff to just get an overview of what the assessment looks like and what the platform looks like. I'm not going to be going into lots of detail. It's going to be just very much a more broad overview. So I did have those who requested just to see that a little more. So there will be that. And then Acadians will be following up with an FAQ session towards the middle of March, because the end of March we run into spring break, but the middle of March with an FAQ. So this overview can give you a look at what it looks like. And then you can come with your questions to that FAQ session with Acadians, and Jared Wright and I will be there as well. And then
Brad would like to know, if we're scheduled for you to come do an in-person training, do our folks need to sign up for March 6th?
That is up to you. So that March 6th is really like, if you want to get a look at what it looks like before we come to do that training, just so that you have an idea, or if you want to look at that so then you know questions that you might have for Acadians, please attend that. So this is really just kind of an information session, and we want to make sure that we are providing what you need and giving you a heads up if you're like, I want a heads up before I'm having everybody else trained. So I personally am that way, but if you're not, you do not have to attend if you do not want to. There is a list of the assessment platform and data reporting trainings that will be in Midas. If we have scheduled something with you in person, it will not be in Midas, and we are planning on you providing professional development training hours, however you want to do that for your specific LEA. But the other platform and data reporting trainings will be listed in Midas. So you can see that there's an assessment platform trainings for math and reading for those who have experience with Acadians measures and just need to know how to do it in ALO. We will still have essentials trainings. So this is for new people who have no experience with Acadians, who need to be trained on either math or reading. And then data reporting platform trainings just for LEA level staff, school leaders, and coaches. It is, if you have lead teachers maybe at your school, those type people could also participate, but it is not designed for all teachers in the state. And we definitely do not have the manpower or days to be able to do that. So this is really for training for your top people to then take that down to that teacher level and help them know how to utilize the reports, how to do progress monitoring, how to download parent reports, and all those types of things. The list is not finalized yet. So you will see, if you go in and look at it, there will be like May, date to be determined yet, because we're still scheduling our in-person trainings. We're still finalizing all of that information because there is a lot to do. And so please come in, and the Midas courses do not have everything in them either. So we are currently building those. The last few weeks we've been madly scheduling things. So we're currently building those courses. So please give us a couple of weeks to get those finalized before you go in and start signing up for things. And then go back and refer to that document for those specific dates and think that's everything.
The question you have is, when do you expect new to the ALO platform schools to have admin and teacher access to the platform, sorry?
Yeah, so that will not actually happen until July-ish, August, really. So well, you might be able to have access, but there wouldn't be anything in there. Students won't roster until our UTREX, everything rosters in August. And so there won't be anybody in there. Like, you won't be able to see it. We will have demo account that when we do those data and platform trainings, that you will have access to that demo account that you can then go in and just look at how things are set up and explore the resource. So we did make sure that we had that available for people, but actual students and actual accounts and all of those things won't be in there until August.
After your first day of school, and then it needs some time to upload. So it's usually your second-ish day of school that things should be listed.
Yeah, so you might have an admin account available sooner than that first day of school, but students won't be there until that point. So just like with all of our rostering for Acadians has been in the past. So, and then there is a requirement for signature, a document to be filled out. So we will have more information about that in our March AD meeting about making sure that document is completed by someone at your LEA for Acadians in order to just facilitate that. And then we are also working with them on a timeline for when we can expect historical data to be input into the ALO system. So we're working on our end as fast as we can. So please be patient as we try and move everybody over. Well, almost everybody. Those LEAs who were already using ALO are probably feeling pretty good about things right now because they don't have all of this training and new things that they have to do. And I'm grateful that it's not every single person.
Those existing LEAs that have ALO, will we get specific instruction how to transition from Clever rostering to state rostering?
Yes, so we are working with them too. That it's going to be like when you just kind of change things over, and the rostering should be pretty simple. So we will have.
That's where my anxiety.
Yes. So we'll have directions. So instead of moving things, you won't have to upload any files into Clever. You won't have to put in any new students or change any of that information. It will all just be done at the state end. But we are also working with them and should have that information in March as well for any current ALO users. Just kind of like, when do you turn things off and how do you manage all of that in March when we have the other rostering information.
How would like to know if they can stay with Clever.
No, sorry.
Issues with manual rostering this year and making sure that the students have the correct SSID and not duplicated. And it's a move we went to several years ago with other vendors and have not been able to do with ALO yet, but we're developing that ability with them so that we can just keep rostering done at the state level like we do for all of our other assessments. So,
yeah, the other really big benefit to rostering at the state level is that student data will transfer between LEAs, right? So currently when we have LEAs rostering on their own through Clever or through whatever, when a student moves, that data does not transfer with them. So if we still had certain districts rostering on their own, then that data wouldn't transfer with that student. And that is actually creates issues, especially when we are really working on trying to ensure that students are receiving interventions and progress monitoring that aligns to what they need. Having that historical data is really valuable. So next slide. There you go. I already said that. And just letting you know, I do have an Acadians Reading Essential course. So if you've hired people, I know that there's a lot of turnover with paraeducators and things that may be administering benchmark assessments, or if you have new assessors that you have hired. I am doing a Reading Essentials course on March 14th for ALO and March 15th for M-Class. So you can sign up for those courses in Midas. So that's for new people who need training in order to administer those benchmarks. So even if you might have had them been doing progress monitoring, but they haven't been officially trained, they really need that official training as part of that ethics, is that you have your staff officially trained for Reading Essentials. Next slide. And then there's just information about the ALO Digital for Acadians Math. So Jared has gotten a number of questions, and so you can go to that practice site. So the practice site for reading and math is exactly the same. If you just go up into the left corner and you can toggle back and forth between the reading and the math. And so then you can see the reading measures, or you can see the math measures and see what it looks like for that digital administration, because there is digital administration in ALO for the K first grade measures. And so we have had a lot of LEAs express interest in having those measures administered online. And then he has just some webinar information that if you have additional questions about those types of things, that you could go in and look at those meeting recordings. And then there is a new math assessment listserv, and I will let Katie speak to that.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to share the joy here.
Thanks, Jared and Teresa. Yeah, we just have a link there for anybody who wants to sign up with their email address. That is for math educators, specialists who would like to be invited for future group work. Like we just had our RISE math item writing workshop, which was a great success. So if you have people who are interested in signing up and want to see the invitations to those kinds of workshops and the content advisory committees and data review committees, that is the place to do it, and we will send you an email.
Okay, sorry, one thing I just remembered, as we're looking at back on the discussion about ALO Digital for Math, in the past, in May, we've typically asked you for a vendor, which vendor you'd like to go with for your Acadians Reading Assessment. This year, we won't be asking that because everyone in the state will be using ALO for Acadians Reading. But for Acadians Math, we'll be sending out that survey for your LEA to respond to, whether you'd like to use ADM as the platform for Acadians Math, or whether you'd like to use ALO. And then in addition to that, whether you'd like to use the digital platform on ALO, or whether you'd like to just manually enter the data into ALO. So that survey, instead of asking for Acadians Reading, we'll actually be asking for Acadians Math this May. And that information that Jared has in there, that you can look at the webinar and see what the difference is for the digital entry versus the manual entry. And just a reminder that it does not mean that you don't have to print papers, because I know that's been a conversation in the past. There is still, the student material papers are still necessary for the students to have printed for concepts and applications and computation. So just a reminder about those things, but that will be coming. So if you'd like to look at the differences between the two and make a decision for your LEA about which platform you'd like to have for your Acadians Math assessment, that will be coming, a decision we'll be asking you to make in May.
A question, so we don't need to let you know if we do paper pencil with Maze?
Right, so you can't put pencil with Maze anymore.
No. The answer is no. And do we have to pay additional for the digital platform for math?
We pay additional for the digital platform for math, but we pay that license. So we pay a license of $1.50 per student for the manual entry, or $5.95 per student for the digital entry. So that's why we need you to make that decision. But that's a state contract. So we pay that license for math for students in K3. If you want to utilize that math
for students in 4-6, that's a license that you set up on your own and pay for on your own. But your payment would be, would match what we pay for students at the state. So $1.50 for the manual entry or $5.95 for a digital entry.
And then I was just gonna add, that you can administer Maze, paper pencil, but it is also available online. And we have found that there are a lot fewer errors when you do the online administration versus the paper pencil administration, because there's a lot more room for human error in either figuring out the score or inputting the score into the system.
All right, for RISE, just on the title slide there, I included the link for the administration training that we had last week. It is up on YouTube so that you can access it when you need to. For an update, the Chrome OS Spanish TTS has had another resolution to the previously outlined issues that have been communicated. If your Chromebooks are using Google's stable OS channel, if you update to the current Chrome OS, you should be good to go, that Google will resolve it in that way. If you are using Google's long-term support channel, you've avoided it altogether, so you don't need to worry. However, if those two things are not within your purview, there is still manual installation that is necessary. And the guidance isn't included here, but if you need extra support with that, please reach out to the RISE Help Desk and they can continue to provide any further assistance with that if you require it. For RISE, remember there are two different types of training tests. The first one, if you go to Systems Training Test, that's like a public version. Teachers can see it, students can see it, parents can see it. You can take absolutely hundreds of them and see what things are like, and students can really experience them. There's also, though, the secure version, which uses the browser, okay, where they would log in. So go ahead and go to the next slide. With this one, the teacher would start a session. They're going to provide a live code. The student's going to use their SSID. Any accommodations that you've entered into TIDE are going to be applied. That's not the case if you're using the public generic training test, okay? So we do recommend using this secure admin prior to, just because it allows you to check all of those things, ensure that accommodations are set before you're entering that summative live environment. Yes, Adam does have something similar, and we'll talk about that when we get to Adam.
Hey, Elise, I'm just gonna jump, on that training. On the training test, that is particularly important for students who are going to be engaging in Braille assessment. I would say it is impossible for a student to, and for the teacher to administer Braille without having done a training test first. So if you communicate that to your TDIs, that is very, very crucial and imperative.
Another thing is when we get asked about schools that are concerned about the amount of parental exclusions, we always encourage you to do a parent informational night and have parents get on the guest training test and let them see what kind of item types and what the test, how it works, what do they see? Because sometimes knowledge is power. It's also really critical to talk about what you do with the data and how it influences their students, and instructional decisions, learning goals that are set. And that is one thing that we have found has reduced some parental exclusion. If you get those pods of parents who are gonna all exclude at the same time, you can do those multiple times. And the guest training test are really useful, especially if you have the students come together with their parents and you put them in the library or put them on their Chromebooks or whatever, have them work on through it together and don't just put them in the library and say, go forth and try, but guide them a little. That has worked really well in the past and it's highly recommended.
Okay, with the two different types of training tests, if you had students who are using the Spanish adaptive version and you've applied that in TIDE, and we'll go over that again as well, they're going to be able to experience the Spanish adaptive one if they are within the secure browser version of the training test. However, if you are interested in showing students or parents what it looks like without applying
the accommodation previously, you can go to the training test, the public version. And when you get to this presentation section, you can toggle to the Spanish option, and it's going to then present the information in Spanish. Just as a reminder here, it is only available for math and science. Okay, so I've had people reach out and say that when they do try to do it for ELA, it doesn't work. And that is correct. And it's not going to. Okay, it's only for math and science.
Directions are in Spanish for ELA?
No.
Not at all. No Spanish at all.
No Spanish for ELA on RISE. Okay, when you get into the test, you're good to go forward. That was fine. Next slide. When you get into the test, from that point on, there's that little globe that will appear where they can toggle between English or Spanish. Again, this is only going to show up if you are in the training test and you've selected Spanish, or if you have applied the Spanish accommodation to the student's test settings in Tide. This doesn't show up for anybody else. It's only going to show up if you have put that in on their test settings, okay? Next slide. For the Spanish adaptive version as well for Windows devices, you will need to have the Spanish voice pack installed. If you already did this last year, you're good to go. If you have not done this and you have Windows devices, you can go through the steps that are outlined here to install that Spanish voice pack so that this text-to-speech will work appropriately. Next slide. When you go to apply the Spanish adaptive accommodation in Tide, you'll go to the test settings and tools, and then you'll need to go to the presentation section where language is the option, and you can select from the math and science drop-downs to have Spanish added to the student's test assignment, okay? All of this is outlined in the Tide Guide, okay? Once that's applied, that little globe will appear and the student can toggle between English and Spanish. That's only going to appear if you've applied the accommodation in Tide. As a reminder, if you are participating in our remote testing for the 2024 administration, we have a special remote testing training, which will cover RISE as well as ADAM. That is being held February 22nd from 1 to 2. You can register through Midas. It will be recorded and posted on YouTube, just as all of our other trainings are taken care of as well.
And we're gonna be able to answer, we keep getting little questions about proctoring rules and all of that. We're gonna cover all of that because the proctoring rules are the same for RISE as they are for Utah Aspire Plus. So there's gonna be a general thing as well as then make sure you know how to get in and all of those things.
Okay, just a reminder that if you have a state requested accommodation, these are entered through Tide, and there's your resources on the steps to do that. There's screenshots and step-by-step guides to do that. I've had quite a few people send me a form that's posted online for Utah Aspire Plus, which actually is not being done this year either, but and I've emailed those people back and told them the correct method, but all of those state enabled accommodations go through the Tide system. Next. And then as we were talking about at the top of the meeting, it's important to remember that you're entering participation codes correctly, and you have to refer to the test administration manuals to know whether accommodation is being applied or not. Like we discussed earlier, not every testing platform is the same. So what's considered an accommodation in one platform might not necessarily be in the other, such as the extended time for RISE. In RISE, there is no time, but then if a student is taking Utah Aspire Plus, that is an accommodation. So you just have to be familiar with those manuals and refer to that. If it is just a universal tool that's available to all students, that's not considered an accommodation. So those students are coded as 200.
But LEAs don't enter to code 200. You don't have to enter code 200 for standard participation in tests.
And Jessica, just clarification. So if anything that's not approved that we turn on, it's not considered accommodation, it's embedded, like an overlay color or something like that.
If it's an embedded, that's a universal tool, that's not an accommodation.
Even if we have to turn it on.
Only if it's outlined as an accommodation in Tide. You have to refer to that in the different sections.
Sometimes color overlay is considered an accommodation. I don't know specifically which test, but I think there are cases where
It's separated in the charts and the
stuff like that.
TAMs.
So yes.
so you have to go to the master guide.
I don't know about, if it's on an IEP and it's requested and the student wants, like if you have a student says, I really like having a bigger mouse pointer, they have no IEP 504, that's not an accommodated test, it's just student request, and that's a universal tool. If it's on an IEP where they are required to have one, then I would say that you would use accommodated 201. Now, we can talk about that, but if it's on the list, but if it's built in, it wouldn't be, right?
No. There are gonna be certain things that are outlined on a student's IEP or 504 plan that might be listed as an accommodation. But if those are universal tools on the test, then it's just a universal tool. It's not an accommodation.
That's good clarification. Thanks.
And even if they have to turn it on, then it's still okay, right? That's why I think what we really need to be clear about that, because when they have to turn it on, I think is when the confusion comes on, because I could change the color of my students' tests anytime I wanted to. They liked black background with yellow writing for whatever reason. But that was an accommodation. I just did that. But I did have students who would have that as they have to take their test with the dark background and light, and it was in, that's the only reason I'm asking, but it doesn't matter, then that's great. But we really need to make sure that we understand, because it is, what Christine
If
just
you have a
asked me.
specific question, ask me, first look in the TAM and see where it's listed in the charts. Is it under accommodations or is it under embedded features or universal tools? And if it's not there and you have confusion, email me.
And Brad just asked, is Spanish translation a universal tool on RISE? No.
No.
It has to be.
Okay, and as I said earlier, there are always exceptional accommodations. The TAMs are not an exhaustive list of every accommodation a student can have. We can't think of every single scenario. Usually this comes down to assistive technology, particularly for students with visual impairments. Technology is always changing. We outline what we can in the field and try to keep up with best practices. But if there's an outlying accommodation that we're not aware of and it's not listed in the TAM, there is an exceptional accommodation request form that you can fill out and submit to us. And the only reason you submit that is we just want to make certain, particularly when it comes to technology, that it functions within the test system. It's not because we're trying to interfere with IEP team decisions. We just want to ensure the functionality of it. Okay. Next. Okay, and then I know there was a change in our roles this year, and Tracy still keeps getting most of the questions for RISE, but this just kind of differentiates the assessments that are in our purview. Just as a reminder, just quicker to get a response from us. Of course, we communicate every day and share emails when they're not sent to the right person, but just a reminder of the assessments that.
All right, for Utah Aspire Plus, I have linked the training that was held a couple of weeks ago here as well. So you can access it if you need to. When it comes to Utah Aspire Plus for before testing, I've included the schedule of events and your infrastructure trial guide, as those are things that are going to help anyone administering the test. And then there's also the practice tests, like the question samplers and the TestNav tutorial, which are things that are for your students. The question samplers are the content specific questions where students can be exposed to the item types of questions. They're going to see the possible rigor of content, those types of things. Whereas the TestNav tutorial really walks them through how to use TestNav. This is how you use the strike through. This is how you use the highlight. This is how you make the highlight go away. So it's more functionality of the system. Both are great tools to use as long as you know which one is which. And when it comes to the question samplers with the Pearson question samplers, Spanish adaptive versions are available as well, both on the public facing ones that students can access at any time. I've just included a screenshot here of the question samplers that are available. You just go and you click on the Spanish version and it will load for you. But just as with RISE, if you have the accommodation set for the student and they go to take the training administration of a test, of a question sampler, they will then be provided with the Spanish version if it is set. Okay, so just it's similar to RISE. You have the public option available, but if you set the accommodation within the system and you go to do a secure administration, those students will have those accommodations provided for them. Okay, next slide. When it comes to setting the Spanish adaptive in Adam, you'll go to the rostering menu under users, you'll edit the accommodations, you'll go down to the language option, and then Spanish, you can apply all, or you can select the individual content areas that are required by the student's IEP or language plan, okay? I think you're gonna get really excited about this. I might be a little bit biased, but it might be the highlight of the meeting. Just saying. That's a bold statement to make, but I think it's going to work.
Firm response.
Friendly but firm. Friendly but firm. All friendly but firm responses are acceptable. In the training that I held the few weeks ago, we went over more specifically how to administer tests in a way that mirrored your experience with Pearson Access Next, with the idea of having your proctor groups. But it was nice that you don't have to like close sessions or complete sessions or remove them and move kids all around. And Tyler briefly did a demo of how you can conduct all of your testing without making proctor groups at all. So it's like RISE. And I've had a lot of questions about proctor groups, which is totally fine if you're choosing to do proctor groups. But I wanted to reiterate in more detail, you don't have to do that anymore unless you're doing a remote testing session, okay? So to test without pre-created proctor groups, you will go to the test card for your, and this is for a training administration as well as a live administration. Either one will work this way. As long as you don't touch the proctor groups and start moving kiddos around, if you just go to the print card option under proctor groups, that's all you need. Your teachers do not need accounts. I have answered, I think, 6 emails just this week. When do I get my teachers into Adam? Spoiler alert, some of them are already there, but they don't need to be. They don't have to have an account to administer the test. All they need from you is this test code and proctor password. Okay, next slide. They're gonna then take that, they're gonna go to the Adam website. They don't go to log in like you and I have gone to log in. They're just gonna click the little thing on the side that says proctor a test. And then that's going to take them to a page where they enter that test code and that proctor password that were on the little card that you printed for them. Next slide. They are then going to essentially create their own session. So you can see here, they have to have a proctor group name. I've just put like 3rd period, Mrs. Bragg, math. Okay, whatever you feel would work there, do it. They'll select district, school. They put in their first and last name. They also put in their email address. Once they hit confirm, it's gonna take them to the proctor dashboard, and they're also gonna get an auto-generated email with that proctor dashboard information, okay? And then all they have to do, when that dashboard pops up, similar to RISE, when that live code pops up on your teacher dashboard and you write it on the board, that test code, QTB, I feel like I'm taking the vision test. QTB IAJ. I just have to write that on my board, not the proctor password. That's just for the teacher. But all I have to do is write that test code on my board, and my students type in their first name, they type in their SSID, they type in their proctor code, and that's what they type into test app. So it mirrors your RISE experience a lot more. Okay, again, if you feel more comfortable creating your proctor groups and having that level of control over where kids are and who they are with and who they're assigned to at all times, by all means, continue to do it, but you don't have to.
So
this will work for you.
are all students live that we don't have to like put the users live or anything like that. They're just ready to go.
They're all in there, ready to go.
You'll have to see something.
Okay, and all of the students are gonna sit in what they say is an unassigned session until a teacher has logged in, and then it funnels those kiddos out who have been assigned that proctor code, and it's gonna then automatically put them into that proctor group that was created.
So
Okay.
Alicia asked, so all teachers use the same code for each testing room?
Yes, because then what happens, if you go back two slides, it's gonna go back two. If you notice, my first test code is real different than the one that I wrote on the board. Okay. Go ahead and go back to the current slide. Go forward one more, Amy.
It's right there in the
Thanks.
corner.
If I were then to, as a school administrator or a testing coordinator, or even an LEA level user, if I want to then go look at the proctor groups that have been created, if I go to proctor groups with view, I can see here all of the proctor groups that have been created by other teachers. And you'll notice in the test code column, they're all different, except for that very top one where students are still unassigned. So this is also really great for your makeup testing. Kiddos who never got signed in with their teacher are still just sitting in that unassigned group. And whatever, if they're in with a librarian, if they're in with a testing proctor, if they're in with their regular teacher, the teacher can open the session and they're gonna be pulled and a new test code is gonna be generated for that group of kids. Okay?
It'll make it a lot easier when you start entering participation codes too, because you'll know where they tested or why they didn't. So you can go back and even ask the proctor, why did this happen or whatever, when you get to that point.
Exactly.
Next
Next slide.
Another question is, would teachers use this same proctor code procedure for practice tests?
Yes, you can do the very same thing for practice tests. Well, if you are using the secure training administration, if you don't make proctor groups, you can just print that proctor card for all of your 37 teachers who are going to be doing training tests and say, give this code to your students. They will then, Mrs. Fry's third period math class can type theirs in. Mrs. Fry's fourth period math class can type theirs in. Okay. It will work for both. And the guidance is in the tab for both of these things. Okay. Which Kim mentioned participation codes. We have another enhancement for you. I told you it's the highlight of the day. So you can also now apply participation codes in a bulk method. It's different currently right now than what you have experienced with other platforms where you're going to have like the CSV file or the spreadsheet that has to be filled out. This is a little bit different, but I don't hate it. It's pretty great. So when you go to Atom, you'll go to the operations menu and you'll click Session Explorer, and then the left side of your screen is going to turn into a filtering option, okay? And you'll have various things to choose from. This particular one, I have selected just a few students, and I've selected, I want to look at any test that hasn't been started yet. This is going to be helpful if you have students who were absent and never actually ended up testing with you. So you can go in and add the absent did not test code. Pick all the kiddos who haven't started and never showed up for testing, you can do that.
That's nice.
Or if they hadn't started and you've received your parental exclusion form, you can go in and click the students who have a parental exclusion form. Just select the kiddos that you want to have that applied. You'll go up to the kebab menu that's in the upper right, and there's going to be the option that says bulk apply accommodations. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And from there, any of the students you selected are going to have whatever code you apply in the dropdown. So again, I've selected the 204 code here. When I select 204, go ahead and go to the next slide. When it goes back to those students, you can now see those 3 students I selected have a red 204 under their participation code column, okay? Go ahead and go to the next slide. This also works if you have students who have already submitted. So again, it happens every year. You might have 5 or 6 students who turn in a parental exclusion form after they've submitted the test. So instead of going and finding individual students, I can come to this option in the Session Explorer. I can search for submitted tests. Now I go find those handful of kids who have submitted the test that now need the 214. So it's going to invalidate because of parental exclusion. Where if you had to invalidate tests due to parental exclusion in Pearson Access Next, you know that it wasn't this easy. So here you go. It's delightful. If you have issues or questions though, go ahead and let me know. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Again, any of the students you apply, those codes are going to show up. You can also just click the set code if you're just doing 1 or 2 students and set it manually that way, but the bulk upload one is there for the selection process with that little box for now. Okay.
Alicia had a question. Do you use the same code for all students regardless of grade, talking about proper codes?
Yes. And then just one more plug for our remote testing training. Next slide. Again, we're going to cover both RISE and Utah Aspire Plus in that. I'll go through the quick how-tos of getting kids ready. And then we also will have it's going to be open forum kind of for you to ask your questions that are more nuanced to your locations as well. Okay, if you are participating in that.
And one thing to consider right now for all of our online students who are going to be testing, the systems are set up. You should be having the teachers, whoever's administering the remote tests, and the students should be practicing the training tests. Immediately before they're going to take their summative test, they're going to have to do a training test. So that you can guarantee right before they test that everything's working before they're already in a summative test and now having issues. And that's particularly important with Utah Aspire Plus, where it's a timed test and, the timing continues. So one of the things you want to make sure to do that. So that's one of the things that we're going to be emphasizing in here is if you are an online school where 100%, students are 100% online, they need to be practicing right now within the platform. There's nothing else we can say. They're gonna have to do it right before they take a summative test, but right now is a great time. And that way, if you're discovering issues with a student's settings aren't correct or whatever is happening, you can fix it now while you have time. If there's uploads or changes or a different kind of machine that, they may need a different operating machine. So you're going to have to provide a different computer to the student, whatever that is, you want to try to solve that before. So.
Yeah. So Adam mentioned earlier that the rostering is where your anxiety comes from around the switch over to our reading benchmark. And you can probably tell that the remote summative test administration causes us some anxiety. We're excited to move forward. We're also one of a few places in the country that actually has moved to a place where we're doing it. So when you hear Kim talk about these steps and requirements and the promotion of the training, we hope any LEAs who are participating in that will listen closely to the things that we say so that we can have a really good experience with it this year and hopefully continue to advance down that road of making that a viable option in the future.
Next slide.
Okay, just a reminder about the accommodated participation codes. It is applicable to the Utah Aspire Plus as well. Okay, and for Utah Aspire Plus accommodations, if you have an additional order that needs to be placed, like for large print, Braille, human reader companions, this opened February 12th. And the vendor just asked for at least 2 weeks prior to the student testing to place these orders. So I would go through things and just go ahead and get them placed now so they're shipped appropriately. And to know what might be a special order or an additional order, this is listed in the TAM on the accommodations chart under the column enabling instructions. It will guide you to know if you need to do this or not. All right, next. Okay, so new this year for Utah Aspire Plus, you will no longer submit that separate accommodation form and email it to me. This is going to be done within the ADAM system, and it is outlined in the posted Utah Aspire Plus manual with the steps to do this to enable these accommodations. I get a notification that you've requested it, but one difference with ADAM versus Tide is in Tide, I set this special request, but in ADAM, I am just like unlocking it for your approval, and you actually, or whoever at your LEA actually sets the accommodation within ADAM. I'm just like unlocking it so you have the ability to do so. Okay. Yeah. And yeah, go ahead.
Final question about ACT now. I mean, the ADAM system, excuse me. With the training administrations, has there been any talk or consideration about having training accounts rather than like student accounts?
There's
So
sure
it's-
talk of it.
Okay.
It's not there.
Just as we're developing training materials for LEA, and having to mask all of that
Uh-huh.
student data is challenging, especially if you're doing live trainings. Okay.
We're pushing for it hard.
There's definitely talk.
Talk is
Let's just
good.
put it this way, it's definitely, like all new systems, there's things that,
Yeah.
but trust us that, it's happening.
Yeah, firm and friendly, and maybe sometimes it's not as friendly.
If I'm sending it, it's probably not as friendly as when Elise does it.
Okay, moving on to ACT, February 15th, today is the last ACT training test administration webinar. This one focused mostly on paper, but they will be talking about ACT now, and they will have a Q&A. And if you have a question, it's a great time to ask the people at ACT. At this, it's only scheduled for an hour because it's, like I said, just for paper, so there's not a lot to talk about. But there will be a Q&A session in the middle and at the end. And so if you have any questions, come to that. Love to see you there. Yeah, that'll be recorded. We have our wonderful Emily who takes care of everything, except she's gone.
Thank you.
Yeah. Some more reminders, and I literally get these right off the schedule events. Before test event 1, you need to have your test rooms created. That helps a lot in TCM. By March 11th, have your room supervisors and proctors ready. The test event for paper is March 12th only. The test event online is March 12th to 15th, March 18th to 22nd. Remember, if you scheduled the test on March 13th and you have to do some makeups, any of those dates work. You don't have to even let me know. Just test the kids, switch them over with their stuff. So next one. My ACT, I have phone calls about my ACT. If your students are logging into my ACT and they have some issues, I can't help you, and the help desk can't help you. Your students have to contact the My ACT help desk directly because it's their information, it's their account. Okay, because we've had some issues where some stuff hasn't gone through it, but you need to make sure that that stuff is distributed in this first test window by March 11th. It's a good chance for them to have some time to get that information in. This is where they enter that information for about themselves and colleges and things that they want to go to. So let's make sure you get that out to them. Next slide.
Christopher asked a question, are we gonna get the booklet about the My ACT that we share with students?
Believe so. That should be coming from ACT. Not sure any dates yet. Check contact the help desk if you haven't seen it yet, but that should be coming in. I've had some schools that have already gotten it. So if you put it in, if you're doing paper testing, if you're one of the few left in paperland, if you put it in for early shipping date, this week, you should be getting your materials. If you don't, again, contact the ACT help desk. I have no way of seeing anything about their shipping and what went out and what didn't. If you didn't put in for early to get it early, then it'll be arriving next week between the 19th and the 22nd. If you have paper tested events during test event 1 and test event 2, meaning window 1 and window 2, they're not going to ship both of those together. They don't want you to hold on to a bunch of secure materials for a couple of weeks. They want to make sure that it stays secure. So don't panic. It's okay. It's just going to come at a later date. It's all right. And again, you don't receive materials as expected. There's the contact information for ACT, contact the help desk. Next one. Testing results. Remember, test results are not immediate ACT. It's 3 to 8 weeks. They got them back pretty quick for most of our students last year, especially the online ones. Usually the online test reports tend to come in within 3 weeks, very quickly. I've had people go, I haven't got my reports, and I go in and look and go, well, I can see them, they're there. Paper tests tend to take longer. If you don't, not seeing your reports, again, the ACT help desk is your best bet to find those. The number one thing we have happen when people are trying to find the test results is you're either looking in the reporting section under the national test, or you're not looking in the spring administration for the state contract. And then you won't, unless you're looking specifically as a state contract for the spring administration, you're not going to see anything. And the system does default to the fall administration. That doesn't happen. So you won't see anything there because there weren't any tests given. So there's a lot of times it's just a matter of setting the reporting section and success correctly to be able to see that information. And ACT Now improvements, we're going to be sending out a survey probably next AD meeting about things you'd like to see in the ACT Now environment. Some of that feedback we've gotten already from people who have used ACT Now. So I want to know what the things you'd like to see in there. And we know, like, for example, the transfer function doesn't work. It might not ever work. The transfer function is used in districts that are specifically district-only testing for ACT Now, and they're transferring students between their schools within their district. Usually, since ACT students are only rostered really once into the system, transferring students between schools isn't going to really work in that system very well. Whereas if you have a student that moves into your school, enroll them in your school, because it's only going to be an ACT Now. It doesn't talk to the Utrecht system. It doesn't change anything in the overall systems or statewide. And if students leave your school, unenroll them. It's really easy, because when you open up the student, it's one of the first options you see. Just click on enroll. And it's real quick. It's real easy to actually get them unenrolled that way. And so I'm not sure. I know ACT says they're working on a workaround to get the transfer student working, but in my mind, I can't see how it would even work since it's not part of the Utrecht system. But we'll see what happens. Maybe they'll come up with something interesting. But yeah, we'd like to, any feedback you got on that, any questions, of course, email me. My number one way of answering things is to look up the scheduled events, look up the Utah ACT website and find the information there, because that's where it all is. And I usually point people to there in my answers. But if you're having trouble with looking at something, yeah, contact me. I'm happy to help you out. Any other questions I got?
No. The questions were directed toward Jessica about ACT.
Cool. And Jessica's
Can I
next. Woohoo.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I put my hand up, but it kept getting put back down. So I'll ask it here.
I can't see any hands on my screen. I'm not running it.
So I'll ask it here in case anyone else has had the same problem. I have set up all my rooms and I've assigned my proctors and supervisors, and then it gives you options to pick if you're using tables or desks. But it doesn't give you any option that I can find to say if you're doing the U-shaped form or the dividers. And so when the teacher goes in, they're wanting them to put like how many feet as if there's rows. Am I missing something? I looked all over.
I have no idea, because I've never had to set up a room.
I thought the ACT TAM is pretty specific, like how far apart the desks have to be, like to the point where you have to get
what
it
she's saying
measured.
is her U-shaped table is not an available option. Is that correct?
Yeah, the U-shaped, or if you do with the carols or dividers, where you can, have the kids facing each other, they're different table settings, and there was no option to choose that.
I would just reach out to the ACT help desk and ask them, because they might just have you choose another one, but the biggest key would be like the feet distance apart. I'm almost thinking if ACT doesn't want you using those U-shaped tables.
Yeah, they really don't.
Well, they had
They really
it
like to have
there.
the kids spaced.
They had it as an option in
I
their
would just-
training.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
reach out to the ACT help desk. That could be an easy setting fix. They might just not be aware it's not available.
Not available, or they might not want it available.
Okay,
Yep.
thanks.
Scott and I can email and ask too. And email you later. Okay, so there is still one window for accommodations for ACT, but it's for a very small percent of students, just for students who might have had a recent initial plan for an IEP or 504, or any health service plan that a student could have if they happen to have changed grade levels, medical emergencies. This qualified exceptions to the deadline is open until March 8th. That is a clickable link there. That's a form that you submit into the TAA to request accommodations only if they meet this criteria. There's no reconsideration window for this deadline. So once that March 8th date has passed, then that's it. Yeah, and just to make certain that you include that form, the qualified exceptions to the deadline form when you are making the request in the TAA. They're going to be looking for that. Next. Okay, there was an accommodations update that ACT emailed us with some more information. This is listed in the ACT accessibility guide, but ACT is no longer this year sending pre-recorded audio. It's going to be an internet link that will be emailed to the test coordinator on file. And just common sense, don't send that link out in advance. It can be emailed to whoever is proctoring the test. So if the person receiving it is not going to be administering it, it is safe to forward that email on to the appropriate school personnel. And there's some more information that Amy sent out with this attachment of all of this linked in there for y'all. That should have gone out this morning. Next. Okay, this is just kind of some guidance that the ACT accommodations team has bulleted together so that you can verify accommodations. You want to ensure that your TAA pins are applied to student records in the ACT Now. We've seen a couple of instances of errors, and this has been a LEA error. It's not a function of the ACT Now. And Marie, I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but it's really the names not matching.
Yes, so the TAA pin is automatically applied to a student in ACT if the name, first name, last name, middle initial, SSID, all the information in TAA matches with what's in ACT Now. If that happens, it's great, it's automatically applied. If name and other information doesn't match between ACT Now and TAA, then you'll need to manually add the pin to the student in ACT Now. It's really easy. If you have any questions on how to do it, it's 2 steps. It's very easy, and I'm happy to help if you have any questions about it.
Yeah, that's been the main error that we've seen. Yeah. Just make certain that when you're setting up your test rooms in TCE and you have alignment and accommodations like extended time, like similar times need to be, or the same times need to be tested together to reduce disruptions to the testing environment. Make certain that your TCM accommodations roster, is accurate. If you have any errors on the day of testing, it is not appropriate to let the student test without their accommodations. This violates their faith, their free appropriate public education. If you have a day of testing error, I would have teachers contact their assessment director, and then you can call me is the quickest way to get me on the day of testing. I will be monitoring my phone. Okay, next. And here's our contact information. Lots of accommodation questions do need to be fielded to the state ACT accommodations phone number or email. But if you're having any issues with advocating for your students, I'm always happy to bridge that gap in conversations with ACT for you. Next. Okay, and then I just wanted to give a reminder about AP College Board exams information. There was a release of the Part 2 of the AP Coordinators Manual, and on page 8, there's just some important reminders, and page 17, there's a planning calendar for you. Don't forget that students with disabilities can be taking AP courses, and we hope that's encouraged at your LEA, and they also are eligible for accommodations on AP exams. They have an extensive manual, just like the ACT and any other testing vendor, it's absolutely allowed and appropriate. I just want to address that because sometimes there are myths within the field of College Board and AP that students with disabilities can't take these classes and can't have accommodations, and that's absolutely not true. They should be receiving their accommodations, and it's up to you as a school to ensure that they're being applied for. Just like the ACT, there's a parent consent form. Just get that verbal consent at least, or parent signature, before you share any information with the College Board about a student. Next. And then there's the direct contact for the College Board Services for Students with Disabilities. Christy Schreck is the specialist at USBE that oversees AP. And then you can also contact myself. I think that's the last slide.
Yeah, thank you. Well, before we wrap our meeting up, we'll pause to see if there's any topics that our team hadn't prepared to discuss today that you have, any of you have questions on for the good of the group. We'll just give you a minute or two, or a moment or two to think about that.
I will just add the videos, the little video clips now have permission to be viewed. So if you're like, I want to see what it looks like, you can go look at.
Oh, okay. In the slide, the link,
Yes.
the link through the slide deck. Thank you for taking care of that so quickly. Okay, well, I want to thank Amy and Emily and also Jerry Record, who helped to get the room ready and make sure our technology was working. Also, all of our team members here for preparing the information for today's meeting, and to thank each of you for choosing to be with us. We hope that your time has been well spent, that we're supporting you in a way that helps you be effective in your community. And I'm very grateful for the open communication that we have between the State Board of Education staff and assessment director community. So thank you, and have a wonderful day.